the guy, I asked him, have you ever been in love? And the cop was like, hey, you need to be quiet. You need to be quiet. I said, well, love will make you do crazy things. And when I said that, he was like, all right, man, you can go ahead and stand up. Put your hands behind your back. And I was like, oh. So I did 16 hours, which, which was like, all right, whatever. And then when I got ready to see the judge, they didn't even want to take it. They were like, oh man, no, don't worry about it. You're getting out. And so that was at like 3:00 in the morning. And I had to sit in this, well, no, I think got in there about 10 that night and got out maybe about 1 or 2 o'clock that Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, so they don't take those jokes as funny as in your head. They were a lot funnier, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I get that. But okay,
yeah,
so
but I've had other, like, my ex-wife used to always call the cops on me when I was in the Army and stuff like that the last year, like 2014, 2015. But she was doing it more intentional. She was trying to get me kicked out of the Army.
Army.
Right?
I was going to say, is that why the Army mandated that you went to rehab?
Yeah, because at that time I was a victim of domestic violence. She had cut my leg with a mason jar, and so she ended up getting arrested. And because that she got arrested and it was considered an alcohol related incident, they sent me to rehab.
I mean, it probably was a blessing in disguise because it sounds like you guys are Johnny Depp and Amber Heard over there. Like, you guys.
Yeah.
Welcome to the show, Kenneth. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, JD. I really do appreciate you having me on as a guest.
Oh, anytime, bud. So let's just start with your sober date.
November 15th of 2016.
Okay, so you're coming up on 6 years?
Yes, indeed.
How's that feel?
It feels really good. It's pretty close to as long as my Army career, which was 6 years and 2 months. So it definitely is a good feeling, and I've learned a lot about myself in those 6 years that I didn't know when I was still heavy into drinking.
Okay, so your like drug of choice was alcohol.
Yes, that was my poison for over 12 years.
When did you start drinking?
Very first time I had a drink, I probably was about 5 years old in San Diego, California. My dad was in the Navy, so he would always, on the weekends, he would have me, he'd be like, Junior, hey, run to the kitchen, go get me a beer. And I, at that time, loved the sound of, opening up a beer can. And so that's what I would do is, like, it was a little distance from the kitchen to the den. I would just take like a little sip from the can and, hand it to him. And of course he didn't know.
Now, is that a triggering sound for you today? I know a lot of alcoholics that they say the sound of a can cracking open kind of triggers them. Has that ever been a trigger for you, you think?
I'd probably say it was more difficult early in sobriety.
Yeah.
Because like that's all I really drank was primarily beer.
Well, I drink Liquid Death.
Okay.
It's water in a can.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes that cracking sound when I open it. So that's why I was it, because to me it's not triggering, but to me it's more like nostalgic. I think of my drinking years as nostalgic now because I'm so far away from it that I don't see a drink on my horizon. I've been through all I've been through in sobriety to show me I can get through anything sober, right? So I feel like I can welcome some things that used to trigger me today to be like, oh, that's cool. That was a different JD, but still that's cool. Whenever I hear like a trigger, because I get triggered by a lot of different things.
Right. Yeah,
I think the important things to call it out.
Yeah, I believe it was more difficult, more or less, at the beginning because I pretty much quit like cold. Well, I guess you could say cold turkey because I went straight from a night of partying into rehab. So it was, and then after that I never looked back. At least this last time. So
now, when you went to rehab, did you go to rehab on your own or was somebody making you?
It was stipulation of me coming back to Minnesota. Um, I was living in Phoenix and was actually in a homeless shelter. So I was at that time I was sober from September 1st of 2016 to maybe mid October of 2016, and was in a homeless shelter. And they I I got kicked out. Let's just say it like that. I got kicked out for taking a towel to go to the gym. Needless to say, and so I called my mom and was like, hey, can I come back to Minnesota? And she said that, if you come back, you got to go to rehab. And so I was like, all right. And so I had to wait a little while. So of course I drank. I probably drank for roughly about 2.5 weeks before I actually got accepted into the rehab facility.
Yeah, because for people that don't know that have never been to rehab, to get into a rehab quick is like lucky.
Mm-hmm.
Like I know how lucky I am. I got into rehab within 4 days of me calling out. Like me
Mm-hmm.
calling them was on a Saturday, and I was checking in by Wednesday or
Mm-hmm.
Thursday. I got really lucky because as I found out quick, because you said Southern California, I got sober in LA,
Okay.
and I found out real quick that not everybody has beds open right away. Like people are
Mm-hmm.
sometimes homeless for, like you said, like you, where
Mm-hmm.
you're just, and you're a homeless vet of all things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you said you
Yes.
spent 6 years in the army.
Yes, I did.
So, I mean, did you drink more in the army, or did that kind of keep you on a straight and narrow?
Let's be clear, ladies and gentlemen. If you guys haven't heard this statement on other podcasts, you might want to turn this up very loud. Alcohol is welcomed in the United States military. I saw that when growing up in my dad, like I said, was retired Navy, and I experienced it in the 6 years that I was in the Army. It's from the top of the chain of command all the way down to the bottom. There's somebody that's facing some kind of problem as far as with alcohol addiction or some type of drug addiction, pain pills or actual street illicit drugs.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that pot is so against the military, but yet people that smoke are way, like, you know what I mean? Like I think it's more dangerous to have a bunch of people drinking with guns in their you know how to use a gun,
Mhm.
as a bunch of potheads that know how to use a gun.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's funny how that is, man.
It's that's a good statement. I've never really looked at it like that, but yeah, I mean, yeah, you're absolutely correct because it, like I said, it a lot of times, even with the times that we did go to the range, they didn't know whether or not people were intoxicated
Yeah.
prior to going out there, and I'm pretty sure that I was hungover, because uh, you know what I
And
mean, like.
and no one's and let's be honest, people that have a gun are way more likely if they drink to shoot it. I see in the
Mhm.
paper all the time, oh, a guy got drunk and went out in his backyard and just started shooting aimlessly because he was upset about a baseball game. And
Mhm.
just started shooting up in his backyard. I mean, it was his own backyard. He wasn't shooting at anybody. He was shooting at targets, but like he was all drunk with a gun. You don't ever hear guy smokes a fat blunt and came in here and started shooting. You don't ever hear that statement. Let's be honest. So it's always been, funny to me, the irony that people with guns can be in the military and drink, which
Mhm.
drink causes mania, drink causes that kind of fear and anger, as opposed to something that's so easy like pot. It's so funny to me by now, man.
Yeah,
So,
because I remember, not to cut you off. I remember
no, yeah,
when I was in El Paso, Texas, at Fort Bliss, and like I said, I lived on base, and the guy, he lived like behind the townhouse or whatever that I was staying in, and so of course, he when we get intoxicated or have barbecues, people kind of just go from house to house to just kind of not everybody but some, and then I befriended him, and this guy had an arsenal. He had an arsenal in his garage, and technically he wasn't even supposed to have that.
that's
You're
what
not
I'm
even,
saying.
yeah, you weren't even supposed to have, like, if you have a weapon, You're supposed to on base. You're supposed to check it in. You're not even supposed to have them in your residence. Like it's insane. So I don't know. Like the guy opened the garage, and it was like literally like as if we were in our in our bay
Yeah,
cleaning weapons. Like that's just how he had them just spread out in his garage. I was like, oh, I don't want to be caught in this garage. I was
yeah.
like, no, not even when he was intoxicated. I was like, I didn't feel
That's
comfortable over there.
like we all watched Cops back in the day. I always say, I used to have this joke when I used to do stand up that like weed is always the innocent bystander.
Mm-hmm.
There was never a phone call on Cops that started out with my husband just smoked and now he's hitting me. It's
Mm-hmm.
my husband's been drinking and then he hit me, or my husband's been drinking and doing meth. Oh yeah, there's weed here. Like weed
Mm-hmm.
is always happens to be there, but always just friends with the wrong people. Like weed just goes with any drug, so it always just happens that weed is there. That it got such a negative connotation to it, as opposed to what really drives people to go be angry and upset and to hit and to swing and to shoot is alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
the most welcome drug in all the country.
Yeah, and the crazy part about it is that a lot of the guys that were in Vietnam and those wars previous, they were using not only marijuana but they were using heroin.
Methamphetamines.
Yeah, stay awake and different things. So it's like go figure. Some 40+ years ago, people were able to use it with no problem.
Yeah,
Now
especially
it is
over
a
in
problem.
Vietnam, they got a lot of people were like getting hooked on like heroin during
Mm-hmm.
Vietnam because that's when they were finding the poppy fields and all that shit. That's a whole different kind of Operation Dumbo, that whole entire thing with the Secret Service, and it's crazy what was going on during Vietnam. All right, so your dad was in the Navy. Were you a Navy kid, like moving all around the country? Because then you mentioned Minnesota. Were you moved all around with your dad, or is that something you experienced?
Well, I was born in Jacksonville, Florida,
Okay.
and so that first I think we only lived in Jacksonville roughly about I from what my the story is told to me like 4 months. So we traveled from there to Connecticut, and then I pretty much was raised in San Diego, California, and so like a lot of you may hear the West Coast slang. You might see a Chargers jersey, San Diego Padres. Shout out to them as well, being the playoffs. But
That was a big
yeah.
win by
So
them last night too, bud. It was like
mhm,
what,
yeah.
7-8 nothing against the Mets. That's a big. I don't see it happening again today. If we're gonna get off topic, I don't see the Mets and the Padres. I see the Mets winning today just because DeGrom's on the mound. That's a
Mm,
different story though for a different day. I like watching the Padres play baseball. They're a really fun team to watch, and last night they
that's
proved
fine.
that. Yeah. So
And
yeah,
so
go ahead.
but not to cut you off, but I had we moved to we moved around a couple cities within San Diego County, but then I moved to Minnesota. Well, we moved to Minnesota like well after my dad had retired. So we moved up here like right before I turned 21. And so, but I've moved around a lot though from 2000 until now. Just like Minnesota's kind of like the home as far as me being an adult, like off and on, because I've left here probably like about 4 or 5 different times and have always came back to start over like
Got
I
that
am this
magnet
time.
that got that magnet
Hmm.
bringing you back in every time.
Hmm. Yeah,
Jersey's
yeah.
my Minnesota. I get it. I kept
Okay.
I kept ended up back in Jersey, and
Mm,
now I'm up in the mountains in PA. No, about 2.5 3 hours from where I grew up. But yeah,
okay.
I always end up back there. But all right, so you moved around a bunch, and you're 21. When does your drinking become a problem? When you're a teenager, or when you're younger, or when you're older?
It became a problem. I would say started to pick up like about 2004, 2005 is like I was getting ready. I left Minnesota, went to Phoenix. I used to work in radio. Was out here on the air, young voice, hip hop. I'm in the culture, and I go to Phoenix thinking like, okay, I'm doing it. Nice. Getting a good start here. Go to Phoenix. I had no luck. So it was like, all right, well now I got to go get a real job. I have a bachelor's degree in radio broadcasting, but I can't even get a job. And this is like country stations, Spanish stations, sports stations. I could not get a job anywhere. So I started, working for like anybody else, a regular 9 to 5. And so I started hanging out with my brothers and his friends, and that's where it was like, these guys are drinking like malt liquor. I was a guy who was drinking Bud Lights and MGDs and the lightweight beer. Now
Yeah.
you probably that would be on the along the lines of like a beer with 60 calories or something. Comparison type. And
This podcast is also sponsored by BetterHelp. If you are looking for therapy and not able to get something right away locally, you can do that with them. Within 48 hours, you can find a therapist to get on telehealth with you. I mean, I haven't heard anything but great things from people that have already done it, that watch my show or listen to my show. If you're looking to get 10% off your first month, you can go to betterhelp.com/MJSPNPMCA. That is betterhelp.com/MJSPNPMCA.
And so I started to kind of sink into a depression because I wanted, to not let my family down, having this college degree, working in my field. Radio was always a dream since a kid. And so to now have to go get a quote unquote real job, it was, to me, was kind of an embarrassing thing. And so whenever, my brothers and his friends, they would, work a 9 to 5. And then when they got off work, I would meet up with them because I wasn't working. I was just spending all day looking for jobs. So then that's when it started to pick up because, it was drinking, we were smoking, and I wasn't used to that because I was constantly working when I was in Minnesota. I worked in radio. I was teaching. At one point, I was working in a prison. So it was like my mom hardly ever saw me. We lived together, whatever, my first couple years after college. And it was like she would see me a couple of days out the week because it was like I would leave at 6 in the morning and wouldn't come home until like 3 and got to turn around and do it again at 5. So it was the life I lived. So it was definitely the change of environment, not having work. And that's when it started to pick up. And I'm hanging out with guys that's 10 years older than me and hearing their problems, what they're having at home. And then I'm like, man, I'm never going to have these, these bad relationships with women. And then sure enough, I was basically, leading myself into those same situations, especially with drinking.
Okay, so when did you join the military? How old were you?
I was 29 going on 30. I went in June of 09, and then I turned 30 like about a month and a half after when I was in basic training.
So was that after one of your moves then? Is that consider one of your moves from Minnesota was the radio isn't working, so now I'm gonna try the military like my dad?
Well, I was in Phoenix from 05 to 08. And in 08, I got into some trouble. And so what ended up happening was I spent a night in jail. No, I'm not ashamed of it. In 2008 September, and I was like, I had to call my mom. Was like, what am I gonna do? She was like, come back to Minnesota. So I spent roughly about a year. Well, I went to rehab. That was the first time in December of 2008. But once I got out that treatment facility, January of 09, the guy asked me, he's like, what are you going to do with your life? I said, I'm going to the military. But I had already told myself that if I ever get to a point where I don't have nowhere to live, no source of income, then I would join the military. And so I knew that it was always there. So I ended up joining.
I was wondering because the average age joining got to be what, like 20, 21 years old is probably the average age, like in a stat that I just made up.
Well, different, yeah, anywhere between 17 fresh out of high school and probably about 21 for anywhere in between that age gap. Yes.
Okay.
So I was considered the old guy, because it was only in my in our company, it was roughly, as far as the guys, it might have been maybe 3 other guys that were over the age of 30. That was in our company. It was 4 companies within our one unit, and it was only like maybe, I would say about 3 or 4 other guys that were over 30, because the age limit was 30. I think at that time it was 36, and so it was between, I'd probably say about 3 or 4. But it was a challenge at first. It was a
Yeah.
challenge to be the older guy, but I was running faster than a lot of those youngsters.
Now, I was gonna say, did that kind of drive you in there to be known as one of like the older guys? Like, did that like put you like in a drive to like prove something?
Yeah, yes and no. I was proving to myself that I can run, run a far distance because, I played out, I played sports growing up and never did I have to run, 4 miles, 3 times a week or something like that. So that was something, to get used to. Like I said, I was running from problems, in 08. I basically lost everything. I was virtually homeless, sleeping from couch to couch to family member to family member's house until it was like, okay, now it's time for me to join the army. So, but
And
yeah.
I feel like it's important people to know that the fact that you were drinking the way you were, it was still like it was still almost like socially acceptable that you were drinking. And then if you relapse with drinking, they're like, "Ah, it's fine. It's just alcohol." Like people don't realize the severity because it's so legal that how bad it can be that you weren't doing other drugs and you still ended up homeless.
hmm Yeah, well, the because I guess I found myself homeless twice in Phoenix, but the last time in 2016, like I said, I was married. So my ex-wife, and I, we were renting some property, and so we had split up maybe because I had left her and I was going to go to treatment in Minnesota, and then she begged me to come back, and so I went back for the rest of the summer of 2016, and then by the time I came back, she left me, and so I was just sitting in the house for that whole entire summer, just getting drunk until that lease was up. And so once the lease in that house was up, I was like, I don't have nowhere to go. Me and her are not getting back together. So it was like, okay, so I went to this homeless shelter, and it was and I don't know if you're familiar with the jails in Phoenix, but it's like they have tent city where they literally house their inmates outside. The homeless shelter I was at was directly across the street from that tent city. So guys were on, literally that was a part of their stipulation, getting out of that jail and would go to that homeless shelter and be there for X amount of time, a year,
So it's
until
a
they could
halfway
release.
house too. Is that what
It was kind of like, it was a combination of all of that. It was a supposedly homeless shelter, supposedly rehab,
it was?
all
Whatever you needed it to be in that moment.
put it, yeah, whatever you can get it
The more
stamped
they can
for.
get state funding for, the more they
hmm
say they do, the more state funding they get, and the more that
Yeah,
they can. That makes a
yeah,
lot of sense to me.
yeah,
So, what were you a big drinker of? Was it beer or were
yeah.
you at? Yeah.
More or less. My favorite rapper is E40. Big shouts out to E40. But he had a line of um, beer, malt liquor, and it was like stronger than like 211s or stuff like that, Hurricanes. And I think his for 24 ounce was the percentage was like 12 or 13 for a 24 ounce can. It was a little more expensive. I had to drive a little bit further to get it, but I supported my favorite rapper. But yeah, I was more of a malt liquor and cheap, little shooters of like E
The
and J,
airplane
Christian Brothers.
bottles.
Yeah, Christian Brothers. I was the cheap stuff. I was never really a person that drank the expensive stuff, except for when I worked on radio and we used to get the VIP treatment, and who you name it, I probably drank it back then.
So back then, like when you first go to rehab and you get out of rehab, what year was that? Your first stint of rehab?
That was 2000, December
8.
2008 to January 2009.
Okay, and when you get out of rehab, how quickly do you drink again?
That same day,
That same day.
literally. Yeah, my
You
nephew.
weren't ready. Yeah, you weren't ready.
Yeah, no, I'll be totally honest with you. I wasn't. I was mad at my father. My father, well, my one of my cousins, he's a pastor up here in Minnesota. So he had it. They set me up, and so they sent me to rehab, and I was just like, look, man, I'm in, so I'm doing the 30 days, and I knew that I was going to still drink, and so my nephew, he picked me up, and actually the rehab facility is like maybe like 15, 20 minutes from where I live now, but I went ahead and my nephew came and got me. And I was like, man, let's, take me to the liquor store. He's like, man, you just got out of rehab. I was like, I don't care. Take me to the liquor store. But yeah, I wasn't ready. I did another stint in rehab in 2014. That was mandated by the Army, and it took me about a day that time to a day or two. But this last time, this very last time in November 15th. I was like, I'm good. My mom, she said it best. She said, what can I do to help my son? And she's like, because I don't want to bury you. And when she said that, I sobered up. I was like, I don't want to drink anymore. And so I just said, okay, I'll drink a couple more days until rehab starts, and then I'm not going to look back. And I haven't.
That's awesome. I was going to ask what was different this time, but also you didn't give yourself enough time in the previous ones to even try to have any kind of semblance of a program. All that you were worried about was, I'm doing my time, almost like jail. Like, I'm doing my time, and I'm going to get out of here, and I'm going to drink again. It is what it is. I'm doing what they want me to do. Fine, I'll take 30 days, and 30 days in a rehab. I know people in LA that were rehab hopping. Literally, they would get out of rehab, they would shoot up, and then go to another rehab saying, I'm an addict. They would drug test him, fail for, heroin, and then he'll be accepted into the rehab where he has a bed with 3 meals a day and not jail. People do that. People live that kind of life. So, like, I'm not surprised at all that you're like, I'm going to drink it right away. I'm just doing my time. Now, your 12 Faces of Sober, what is that? Is that like a podcast that you have?
Yeah, well, 12 Faces of Sober basically is it's a little bit of everything, but I authored a book, 12 Faces Sober. The 12 symbolizes the age, the very first age. Well, when I got drunk the very first time, I was 12. The faces, it came from when I was in rehab this last time, it would be like, on the piece of paper, which face do you feel today? Happy, joy, sad, angry. And so, kind of just check the box to say you're participating in the group. So I was like, okay, I'll just use it as that. So 12 Faces of Sober. So, but yeah, it's the book. It's been out since August of 2020. Became a bestseller February 22nd of this year. I also do. Thank you. I also do the podcast. I've so far recorded 60 episodes. Can't wait to have you on my show as well.
I'm down whenever. Yep, I'm down whenever. But I'll have the link if you're listening or watching. The link to your book will be right in the description right here. So I'll make sure it's linked up. So if you're listening or watching, you want to check out his book, just go into the description and you'll find the link right there, right underneath the description of the episode. Now I gotta ask, because you mentioned you did a night in jail. What happened that you got put in like jail for the night?
It was September 19th of 2008. I was working for a company, nonprofit, I guess you could say. Woke up that morning, I was engaged, and the person I was with told me that she didn't want to be with me anymore. And so I was like, well, I had already dealt with, an abortion with this woman like about 8 months prior. And I'm like, but I didn't walk away from her when she decided to have an abortion. So you're going to walk away from me because you said I don't have any money. But I basically helped her raise her 2 kids from January until September, and if it wasn't for me, she wouldn't have been able to have anybody even watch her kids. And so when she said that, I had the night before, I went grocery shopping and got some food. And so she sat there and was like, when she said it that morning, I never forget it, it was on a Friday. And so I went to work. Shouldn't have went to work that day, but I did. And I, just dealt with a lot that day. And when I came back home, I was intoxicated. We got into not a physical altercation. It was just more or less of a verbal. And I punched a hole in the door, not gonna lie. So they eventually charged me with criminal damage, but it was because I was cracking jokes. Because I told the cop, he was like, man, you got to be quiet. Here it is, this big black guy in Scottsdale. I don't know how familiar you are with Arizona, but I was in Scottsdale, and the guy, I asked him, I said, have you ever been in love? And the cop was like, man, you need to be quiet. You need to be quiet. I said, well, love will make you do crazy things. And when I said that, he was like, all right, man, you can go ahead and stand up. Put your hands behind your back. I was like, oh. So I did 16 hours, which was like, all right, whatever. And then when I got ready to see the judge, they didn't even want to take it. They were like, oh man, no, don't worry about it. You're getting out. And so that was at like 3:00 in the morning. And I had to sit in this, I think I got in there about 10 that night and got out maybe about 1 or 2 o'clock that Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, so they don't take those jokes as funny as in your head. They were a lot funnier, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I get that. But okay.
Yeah,
so.
but I've had other, like, my ex-wife used to always call the cops on me when I was in the Army and stuff like that the last year, like 2014, 2015. But she was doing it more intentional. She was trying to get me kicked out of the Army.
Right?
I
was going to say, is that why the Army mandated that you went to rehab?
Yeah, because at that time I was a victim of domestic violence. She had cut my leg with a mason jar, and so she ended up getting arrested. And because that she got arrested and it was considered an alcohol related incident, they sent me to rehab.
I mean, it probably was a blessing in disguise, because it sounds like you guys are Johnny Depp and Amber Heard over there. Like, you guys.
Yeah, it was crazy. Like, it all the way up until, like, she called the cops. Like, I was days before taking my terminal leave. Like, I was getting ready to sign out and like just go sit at home, and the Army was gonna pay me for like 60 days of being on vacation. And she literally called the cops, and they were like, man, my commander was like, Watson, now we can pull everything right now, and we could pretty much, because they were, like I said, they were trying to kick me out in 2014. And so here it is, 2015. Like, I was supposed to, I think, sign out August 6th. This was like August the 4th or something like that. Like, she was really she was going for trying to take my freedom away. But like I said, somebody was definitely looking out for me.
Yeah, I think so. So what made you want to write a book then? Like, I mean, a lot of us want to tell our story, but what made you want to sit there and be like, I need to put my story pen to paper?
The students at St. Cloud State, when I was working on my master's degree, because when I went straight from rehab to I got the keys to my apartment the day that I got out, and then while I was in treatment, I had applied to grad school from my alma mater, and so what ended up happening was they had my old advisor from when I graduated in 2003. He still was a director of one of the student organizations. So he was like, all right, I just want you to just sit in the office. Any students coming here, just be a mentor to them, answer questions, things of that nature. Because I was like 37. So in the eyes of some of these students, I was like their parents practically. And so,
or like their teachers anyway. I mean,
yeah. And so they would ask me, like, why are you working on your master's degree? And I'm just like, I don't have anything else to do. I'm now sober, this and this and that. So I started to build relationships with some of the students. And so the students was like, man, you've been through a lot. Maybe you should go ahead and write a book about it. And so I was like, well, I'll think about it. And what I'll do is, if I do, I'll wait until after I finish my master's program, because I'm writing papers like crazy. And then so that's what I did. I graduated December. Well, I completed it. Well, I walked May of 2018, but I completed the program December 2018. And so I decided to start writing it like June of 2019, and then it came out a year later.
I was gonna say, you got it out there pretty quick then.
Mm-hmm.
All things considered.
Yeah, it's a short read. And like I said, when I realized like how I did it, I talked about certain relationships, and obviously not all, but there are certain chapters within that book that could be a book itself. Like my marriage, that could be a whole book just for being married in those 6 years. And so what I did was I kind of wanted to just touch on certain situations that occurred, and then just put it to paper, and then just see where it goes. And like I said, if that day does come, then I could just focus on one of the chapters, and that itself could be a book.
Could you even? You could technically. I mean, I'm just throwing it out there, maybe, but that sounds like it could be an interesting way to take somebody through your book on your podcast.
Mm-hmm.
You know, break down the chapters. Do you do that ever?
Mm-hmm.
On you break down your book at all on your pod? Because that would
Not.
be. I think that would be cool if you ever needed to do solo episodes. If it were me that
Mm-hmm.
had a book and you, like you said, that's a chapter within a chapter.
Mm-hmm.
You could almost break down that chapter for an entire podcast.
Mm. Yeah, you know what? You just gave me a good idea. I like that. Now I thought about it, but I just I don't know. Like I be having 1,001 thoughts run through my head, and then I just don't put them together. But now that, like I said, the book itself is been out for a while, maybe I should, because like I said, I'm still working on. I have a children's book that's already completed that I just need to go talk to some publishers about. I still working on my Army book. That one is going to be it's a while before I'm gonna put that one out. And then I also, like I said, my radio career, because I don't want to talk about, like, it won't be my name, it'll be somebody else's, but just the experiences that I dealt with, and even some of the iconic rappers that I met back then that were just starting out are now like considered as legends in the game, and
Who's
they're
that?
constantly. Um,
I grew up with '90s hip hop. I'm old enough.
no, this is in the early 2000s. So like,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, I
Remember,
would
I
say,
grew up outside of Philly, so it wasn't like Arizona, right? Arizona, there's barely, it's all country and all that shit. I grew up in
mm,
Philly where we had like three different hip hop
mhm.
stations.
Well, no,
You kind of had to love
I
it.
wasn't on the, I wasn't on the air in Phoenix. I was up here in Minnesota, but like, I would say, Kanye was definitely not the person
He's
that
a
he is
fashion
today.
icon now.
Yeah,
He's a,
he's on a whole different level. He was just a quiet guy in the corner. Um, I will say that, I Ti, I've been trying to get a hold of him to see if he remembers, but I was the first one. Well, I took him to the Mall of America like he had never been there before, and so this is before like a lot of the artists would come to Minnesota. They didn't come with like no real big entourage. It was like it might be just the artist and maybe one person with them, and sometimes some of those rappers came by themselves.
there's a funny story about Kanye that I heard recently that not everybody knows. You know how like on the song Gold Digger, that was his idea for Jamie Foxx to do that Take My Mind, like the beginning of the song.
Mm-hmm.
That was straight up the idea of Kanye. That was just like, no, I want his voice like on, like he is somebody who knows music. I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't go to him for any kind of mental health advice.
Right, right, right.
But fashion advice and music, yeah, you talk to talk to him. I'll make sure that you got your children's book already out too.
No, no, the
Okay.
children's book is pretty much still in production. That one is about playing baseball in San Diego in the 80s, and because I went to the school the elementary school I went to was like not, it might have been like maybe one exit from the old Jack Murphy stadium
Jack Murray, Tony
and every.
Gwynn's house.
And so and that's who I learned how to play baseball from, was Tony Gwynn.
Tony Gwynn,
And
man.
yeah, and I don't know, I don't know if you remember them, but let me see. Um, I think Terry Kennedy. I think he was a catcher for the Giants back in the 80s.
Might
Goose
be just
Gossett.
might be just before my time.
Okay,
I
Goose
got
Gossett.
into. I know Goose Gossage. I know who
Yeah,
that is. He was a
yeah,
feared pitcher. People
yeah.
like he had that look where you would look down, and he even says it. I saw in an interview, Goose Goss. He goes, "My whole entire point of the mustache was to intimidate the batters." Like that
Mm,
dude. Yep.
yeah, he. I was in. This was, I think, second and third grade. He when he was with the Padres, he his son was in the class, and I'll mind you, I'm the only black kid in this class, and he remembered my name every time he came into that class because I was religiously watching the Padres. So it was like if the Padres lost the game, I'd be like, "Oh, you guys lost last night. Oh, you guys won." Like I was just that guy as far as sports. And so like I wrote about playing baseball, being the only
That's
black kid
cool.
out there, being like a really, really good athlete.
Yeah.
And because my dad was in the Navy, he never saw me actually play because he was always out to sea. So that's kind of the concept of that and
I like
everything.
that a
So,
lot, man. I
hmm
grew up the first year I got into baseball was 93 and the
okay,
Phillies went to the World Series that year and I went to like
okay,
20 some games. I grew up 10 minutes from the stadium.
okay.
So I would go over there a lot like and I that was when I first got into baseball and I fell in love with the entire game at like 6, 7 years
Okay.
old. So
Yeah,
those were
yeah,
the
I
big
was,
90s.
yeah, it was just one of those things where my dad, he taught me how to play baseball. That was the first sport that I played before football, before I played basketball, and I really thought I was gonna go somewhere in baseball, and
See,
I
that's where we
just,
differ. I knew I wasn't going anywhere past
yeah.
I knew I wasn't getting out of Little League.
Mm.
You
Yeah,
know, I
I was tall enough because I was like the biggest kid out there. You know what I mean? So it was like I
mhm.
was towering over the kids, playing first baseman, and it was like,
You're the
yeah,
second children's author. I just realized I had a children's author on in season 2
mm,
where she writes books though based on how she grew up with an alcoholic mom. And
mm,
it's all like learning. I forget the name of the book, but it was all about how she discovered what AA was and what these meetings were
mm,
as like a kid because like the mom called it some kind of I forget the name, but it's just her book was a little bit, but she was from California too,
okay.
so that's a just weird coincidence. But I'm glad to see that you're getting all that right because I'm sure that writing's got to be cathartic for you, right?
Yeah, I mean it's when I wrote I wrote the children's book. I was on the beach actually. I was in Panama City earlier this year. I had was in much better weather in January than I am right now.
Oh yeah, I
But
believe it.
I just I knew that I wanted to write it, and it was just a matter of like, okay, let's go on the beach. And then I just came back, sat in the Airbnb that we were staying at, and I literally just wrote it. And I barely read it, to be honest with you. Like I was sitting on that for at least like 4 months before I had even sent it to the publisher. I was just like, I was afraid to send it. And then when I sent it to him, he was like, I really like this. And so the only thing I've been trying to do is get a hold of Tony Gwynn Jr. because I know him through mutual because I think he's only like maybe a year or two younger than me. But I
Hmm.
know it was kind of interesting because I went to my last, I think, yeah, the last Twins game I went to, which was it was in 20, I think it was 2019, right before I left. So like June of 2019, they were doing like a Tony Gwynn on the jumbotron. So I was getting all the pictures and I sent it to him. And then like so he saw it on Instagram and I told him, I was like, hey, this is what they're doing out here. Your dad's getting love, not just in San Diego, but in other ballparks. And I need to get a hold of him because I might use his name in the book, his dad's name, but I don't know like how to get the clearance for it or whatever. But I definitely want to use it and want to get it to him. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And to the rest of the team. So that
How
is
I would
definitely
do it I would take like a picture of like maybe a draft of the book or
mm,
something, but take a picture of it, post it in your Instagram story, and tag him in it and be like, hey, I'm writing this story and I'm wanting to use some kind of thing to grab his attention. If it were me, that's how I would do it, at least.
Right.
I would try that and many other ways, but I would try that. But yeah, man, let me know if you ever want me to be. I'm down to do your show whenever, and I'm glad you got to sit down and tell your story on mine. Like, it's been a long time in the making with my hiatus that I went through because I had to take a break myself. So now I'm back to.
Yeah, it's all good. I mean, this is the where I want to spend most of my time. You know what I'm saying? Just being able to speak, being able to ask the questions, and be able to truly help others that need the help, because this is a lifetime thing for me. This is not just something that's temporary. Like as I mentioned in my story, like I didn't, I wanted to continue to drinking, continue to drink, but now the things that have happened to me since getting sober, I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. I know that if I was still drinking, I wouldn't have been able to do a study abroad in South Africa. I wouldn't be able to travel. Before the pandemic, I was going to various sporting events throughout the country, if it was the Padres or the Chargers, to watch them play and stuff. So it's, now that things is kind of, going back to pace, like I might start doing it again, going to sporting events and, just do everything sober, because being sober is not boring. I'm gonna tell you that much. I love it, and I want to continue.
As they say, we're not a glum lot. That's what one of the cliches in AA is. We're not a glum lot.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? We know how to have fun. I mean, just taking the drink away. That's all. We're still fun people. We still want to crack jokes and have a good time. I mean, you're proof of that. So. But yeah, I'll make sure to have all your links, to your social medias and all that kind of stuff will be right in the description. So whether you're watching us or whether you're listening, if you go to the description, you'll see the link to his book and the podcast and all that.
Cool. Thank you, JD. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you, man. Anything else you want to plug before I let you go?
Oh, 12facesofsober.com. You can get everything from the signed book. I have new merch on there. You can also see photos of just kind of a timeline as far as my progression, as far as throughout the sobriety. I might have a few more things coming up. I need to start doing like some journaling, but like I said, 12facesofsober.com. Click merchandise for the gear, signed copy for the book, and like I said, you get an autographed and signed copy of yours truly.
Is that 12? Is that number 12 faces?
Yeah.
Number 12, facesofsober.com.
Just how you have it right there on the name box or whatever, just .com.
All right, awesome. I'll make sure it's definitely in there. Thanks again, bud. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, JD.
Go Padres and Phillies, man. I'm rooting for both of us tonight. Right, I got to see. I got to see my brother's favorite West Coast team is the Padres. So we've been talking shit because I like the Mariners. Mariners came up big last night. The Phillies came up huge last night, and the Padres came up big. So should be a fun weekend of baseball, bud. I'll talk to you soon, okay?
All right, bro. You take care.
All right. I'll see you later.
I know. Bye.